amendment want to put it back. They've changed the timeline to make it, put it out 2 months. It was originally going to start running up by August 1st. The department would file a petition. That's been pushed back to November 1st, and then the dates for board action on page 8 reflect also a 2 month lengthening. Then the 11th instance of amendment deals with the sound standards, and actually the change is really on line 9 to move the date forward to July 1st, 2017. The House proposes it to be September 15th, 2017.
So the language that passed the Senate looked like nothing like this or like this?
Nothing like this. This is the House language modified just with the date change. That's it. Yep.
The substantive change, though, just remind us.
So the substantive change is moving away from addressing the board's pending docket and telling them when to complete it and expanding its scope. That's what this, that's when it left the Senate, that's what it did. Instead, telling the board to finally adopt rules by a date certain on sound from wind generation facilities, unless the deadline is extended by LCAR. So that is also added by these. That's often standard when you give deadlines for rulemaking. You see that also in the other rulemaking on the top of the page. So LCAR has the power to extend rulemaking time periods.
And then it applies to projects that were permitted up to a year earlier.
Well, that have applied up to, over a year earlier, on or after April 15th.
So I'll ask the question I asked earlier. Is it typical to have this type of retrospective rulemaking in place for any business? Do we know of a business that's been regulated in this way, where you come in and you say, oh, I'm going to do this, I won't know the rules until after I've already started the application process?
It's not.
I understand that there are people who really think this is great, and it may well be, but I think we need to see that we're putting something in place. I don't know whether it sets a precedent or whether it's something that we've done in the past.
It's not typical. You have done, my recollection is that this body has done retroactive legislation in the past. And there have been, I know that the Public Service Board has actually in some CPGs said they're conditioned on complying with subsequent rule changes, but I can't bring to mind what the substance was. And the gentleman from the Public Service Board is sort of confirming that, but
Sure, Kevin Pick with the Public Service Board. There are some instance stories, for example, net metering CPGs, where the board has conditioned net metering CPGs on observance of any modifications to the net metering rule regarding, for example, transfer of the facility and that sort of thing.
I'm not necessarily thinking that those are, I'm not saying those are necessarily the same import.
But one of the questions is, and this obviously this is probably the provision which is made. We passed a bill out of that Senate, which the Senate, through all its warts, thinks is the best product and is able to get through 30 different people. Also in anticipation of a House which is typically had a very different flavor to the way it's approached these things. This provision now is the linchpin provision, if you will, for many people who are interested in S.230. In fact, they wouldn't care if anything but this stayed, and that's okay. But whether you're for or against this provision as it's written, it seems to me that we would want to add language which said that any CPGs issued on or after April 15th, 2016 shall include clear language that their CPG is subject to the wind rules that will be forthcoming, just to not have the effect of granting a permit and then subsequently violating this otherwise fairly steel trap rule of not retroactively applying to new conditions. It seems consistent with what's here, it just would be more transparent and then kind of finesses a way through, not violating the general principles that are involved in land use permitting, everything from putting a window on your house to building a wind turbine.
I think you could include language to that effect.
What would be the
It would
downside?
have to be probably on or after the effective date, only because the instruction won't be effective until the effective date.
Why did they pick April 15th, out of curiosity?
Sort about applications coming in before the effective date. I think the provision can apply.
April 15th is already happened,
Right.
so I'm just,
But what I'm saying is, physically, if the board were to issue a CPG between April 15th and the effective date of this, and you said that CPG was supposed to include certain language, that they wouldn't actually be required to include that language until the day it becomes effective. That's the only, that is the wrinkle. So you could require them to include that language. But I don't think if they happen to issue.
can you draft something that would achieve that objective, and then we'll see if we think it makes sense. On principle, I've always, having developed things that are generally well received in communities, senior housing, there's very rarely resistance. No, the idea of having a project then have to incur new costs or other expenses, they might not have always been bad, it's just changes things substantially for you from your budget and so on. In this case, it's a more controversial type of development, but nonetheless, that principle, the best we can do to preserve it, I think is worth doing. I think this tries to, but maybe we can be a little clearer. All right.
So then, the 12th instance of amendment would adds two sections, 12A and 12B, that would put back the preferred location pilot for the standard offer, but limit it to 1 year. So instead,
It's not really a question for Aaron, but I'm wondering if we're gonna have somebody prepare a fiscal note for us, because I'm hearing some widely different numbers, estimates for this.
On this provision.
I'm hearing 10 million from one side and 5 million from another. I'd like to know if it's a 200,000 hit to ratepayers or 400,000 hit to one. We've already, the Senate Natural Resources Committee has already recommended putting back in the $300,000 hit to ratepayers. I'd like to have something at the end of the day that says, this is how much ratepayers are going to pay for this bill.
Aaron, do you think there's any analysis done or could be done that would provide us that sense? I've heard 20 million for what it's worth.
I believe the department did some analysis of the rate impacts of the 3-year pilot.
Any thoughts,
They've
John?
done this.
So, it's only an estimate because, as you know, the standard offer program is resolved by a reverse auction, and without the outcome of the auction, you don't know. Under the assumption that this is a 1-year pilot, 1/6 for parking canopy type structures and 1/6 for other preferred sites, and on the assumption that the differential between least cost development and the parking canopies is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour and about 4 cents for the other preferred sites. The math that we arrive at is about a total annual impact, once both of these are built out, of about $230,000 annually above what the sort of normal lease cost solar development would be.
$230K a year for, these are 20-year contracts?
Well, the life of the project's 25 years. So that's where I think you get it. If you take that 230K multiplied by 25 years, that's about 5.75 million. I mean, it's worth noting for you all that what passed out of Senate Finance previously was a program that started at 1/3, moved up to 1/2, and on the 3rd year moved up to 2/3 of the standard offer program. This is limited to a 1-year pilot that equals a total of 1/3 of the program, or 2.5 megawatts.
So where is the industry getting their math wrong that's not going to figure your opinion?
You know, we've had some, I think, well, I again will say, we say a 4 cents per kilowatt hour difference for the other preferred sites and a 10 cents per kilowatt hour difference for the parking canopies. I don't know what their math looks at to get it at 400,000.
Would you sit down with them and compare your math?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already sort of done that, but we just haven't, we'd be happy to do that more detail.
Otherwise, the language is very similar to what you saw on preferred locations. So there's a definition of preferred locations that includes all the same categories, except it's not related in any way to net metering. This is all standard offer. It's all part in the pilot. So really, we move on to page 14. It includes the language that you had put in about safeguard if you only get one application for the parking lot.
No competition.
Yeah, competition issues. It's actually on the top of page 14. And then there's the report for the pilot on the bottom of page 14. Then the 13th instance of amendment is what puts back the Agriculture Build Act. And it's also merged with buildbacks that are authorized actually in both versions of the appropriations bill in the House and Senate for A&R and the Department of Health to go back to the cost of monitoring nuclear generation plants. And the reason for that is that if both bills were to pass, they both amend the same sections. And they both say section 20 shall read thus, section 21 shall read thus, and you could argue that by doing that, they are conflicting. And that,
I'm still missing why it's in both places.
in this place,
It's nuclear stuff, we didn't deal with that, did we, when we did S.230 the first pass?
the reason, no, you didn't.
Okay, so now it's being, even though it's in the budget, it's being put in here in case what?
In case, if the budget, if both were to pass and they only address in their silos what they address, then, and one is effective later than the other, or one is signed later than the other, then an argument can be made that that's the only one that's left. And that we in the Office of Legislative Counsel would have to look at that and say, can we reconcile these two based on their language or not? And I have not found a way to draft it so that you can just completely separate it, which is normally what I would try to do. So what this would do is actually take effect one day after the appropriations provisions and include everything that was done in appropriations plus the agricultural bill back. So
Got it.
It would affect the intent of the Senate.
That's very helpful, thank you.
And so then the 14th instance of amendment is the effective dates. And it's just making sure that the additional sections added here will be that need to be effective on passage will be, such as the schedule for the rules on post-construction follow-up on site mitigation, and also that the build act provisions will take effect on July 2nd, one day after the other bill passes.